and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to another week of Global Café. My name is Natalie Mystery, and today I'm very excited to be introducing you all to Joe Loughran on the topic of changing perspectives, age without limits. Ms. Jo Loughran, Director of Beech Hill Consultant. Jo is an experienced leader and strategic thinker with 20 years of involvement in the UK charity sector, pulling on her specialist knowledge of behavior change campaigns. Campaigns she has worked on most recently include Time to Change, the mental health anti-stigma programs, and now Age Without Limits, changing the way we all think about aging. Since 2021, she has worked as a consultant, offering her wealth of expertise to commercial and charitable organizations nationally and internationally. Consultant to the Center for Aging Better since September 2022, Jo has supported the team to create the Age Without Limits campaign to challenge ageism for the benefit of all of us as we grow older. From insights research to campaign development, from building infrastructure to campaign launch and delivery, all of it all together. Director of Time to Change since 2016, Jo led the team to improve public attitudes and behavior towards people with mental health problems, reduce discrimination towards people with mental health issues that they may report in personal relationships, social lives and at work, as well as making sure that even more people can take action to challenge stigma and discrimination in their communities, workplaces, schools, and online. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jo.
Thank you. Thank you. So lovely to be here and great to be talking about this topic.
Amazing. So I just wanted to start off by asking about your story and how you got involved in the work that you do today. What really led you to focusing on aging and older people within your career?
Well, it's as you sort of said in the introduction. So my story really is that I've always felt very passionate about amplifying the voices of people who either are not represented or whose voices are kind of dimmed and dulled out by other people and other people's expectations on them. So that's always been a really kind of a key part of the passion that I have. So as you alluded to, I spent 20 odd years working in the mental health field, particularly on the Time to Change programme, which I know I'm biased, but felt very iconic. And in those last 5 years, I worked as the director of the campaign. And so I really didn't want to just jump into another job when that role came to an end, because the programme came to an end. So I set myself up working for myself, because what I'd realised was that there's probably quite a lot of people who are interested in how we might change behaviour at that kind of macro level, who might benefit from some of the experience that I'd had. So I got a call from the chief executive at Centre for Aging Better to do exactly that, to have a quick chat about what they might do if they were considering doing something that really helped us to challenge at a national level some of the kind of ageist attitudes that we knew existed, and particularly address some of those harms that we know come from a society that thinks negatively and stereotypically about who we are as we age. And so here I am working and supporting the team to do just that.
And thank you for that. That's, it's lovely to see, the career path and where it's brought you towards today. So again, on that same kind of line, your career path has taken you through tackling many different issues such as mental health and aging. But at the center of each issue is your drive to improve the behavior surrounding them. So could you just kind of talk us through behavioral change campaigns a little bit more and kind of tell us what's usually involved with that?
Yeah, sure thing. So, I think essentially it's we always kind of start with kind of, well, what's the problem that we perceive to exist, and that issue that we think needs to change, and always asking ourselves the question, what's the change that we want to see in the world, and kind of working backwards from that point. And the best way to really unpick that in terms of pulling together a campaign is to absolutely 110% to speak to and understand from people who are directly impacted by whatever the issue is, about what that problem looks like from their perspective. So whether that be, when they're experiencing it, from whom they're experiencing it, in what context, what are the impacts on them individually, and what does it kind of feel like to be at the receiving end of that, so that we can really identify what needs to be addressed and changed. In terms of, if I kind of take you through the story of the setup of the Age Without Limits campaign, we did that kind of insights piece in kind of three ways, really. The first was to do some semiotics, which very much looked at kind of like, what's the origin of this as an issue? How do we get to where we are now? How can we understand where ageism begins, and how it's perpetuated? We supported that with then making sure that we spoke with and did a number of mini focus groups with people aged 50 plus, and again breaking those age ranges down, because one of the ageist views that we have is that everybody over 50 is the same. We would never think about anybody 20 to 35 or 20 to 40 of being exactly the same and having the same outlook on life. No reason why we should do that if we're thinking about 50 plus. So we did lots of mini focus groups with them, and that helped us to develop a kind of, or helped us to develop a survey that went out to a nationally representative sample of people. Because what we then needed to do is we needed to understand, well, where is the general population in terms of their views and attitudes around age and aging? And so that nationally representative survey helps us to get that kind of base of understanding, but it also helps us to kind of segment the audience. So we need to be able to segment the audience, because usually we have a limited budget, so we can't reach everybody. And it's really, really difficult to reach everybody, because you need to bring it down a little in order to think about who it is you're going to be targeting. What's the message that you need to be delivering to this particular group? Where are we going to reach them? And how are we going to deliver the message? And that's about the kind of creative, that's about the tone that the campaign might take, what might the key messages in general be. So all of those things kind of feed into being able to then create a campaign that resonates with people, that makes it through to those people because we know where they are, and then really has a very specific and targeted call to action to get people thinking or doing something slightly different.
Yeah, that I think, thank you for using the example of the current the campaign right now strategy. So essentially your guys are addressing the issue at hand, seeing what exactly is happening, finding the baseline understanding of what is actually happening. And because older adults, such a heterogeneous population, you kind of have to pinpoint what exactly you're going to be directing everything towards. And that's often a difficult kind of thing to navigate. But I guess it all depends also on resources and kind of what is the easiest way to kind of tackle that. So that's thank you for, kind of going through that with us. And so what are some of the challenges that you've come across with behavioral change campaigns, and like how have you kind of navigated those difficulties?
Well, I think my overall experience is that there's often a number of masters when you set out on trying to do a kind of macro campaign like this. So, lots of organisations very much want to address the issue. So for me, kind of behaviour change campaigning is almost like a kind of a foundation to lots of other things. If you get that bit right, lots of other elements within the organisation that you might work for become a little bit easier, because you're addressing something that might actually be invisible. But what that also means is that if you're working in an organization that has some very specific outcomes that it wants to achieve, what you find from your insights research might be slightly off kilter with perhaps what the overall need of a campaign, need of the organization is. So, that's a challenge we have to get around, and we have to make sure that we are always running these campaigns based on what our insights research tells us as a fundamental, but that can be sometimes a bit of a battle. It's always kind of a bit of a worry. There's always that kind of angsty moment. We're all going through it right now, because remember, we only just launched on the 15th of January, where you put your beautifulness out into the world, and then you sit back and wait for it to hit the right audience, for the right messages to get through, for people to take from it what you really hope they're going to take from it, because it's amazing the different things that people take from a campaign that are unintended, and that it's going to land and reach and get people to make the changes that you want them to make. So there's kind of that. The other really important thing about it is that we've got to learn from, and we've got to be researching and evaluating what we do all the way through, because we can't just say, well, we've done it and now it's gone into the world. We have to learn how it landed, so that the next time we come to do an iteration of it next year, we bring in all of that learning. Did we reach people better through, for argument's sake, putting adverts at train stations? Or was it better that we actually reached people through social media, because that was the thing that started the conversation? Because that will help us decide what we do next. Whether the message lands really, really well helps us to understand whether we can be a bit bolder, or we were too bold, and therefore we need to kind of change things. So the other challenge around this is that we have become, as a global society, I think, very very anti what we might consider to be wokeism. And so that is a real challenge. You're always going to get detractors. You're always going to get people who welcome what you're doing, people who disagree with that, and that's great, because that's part of the conversation. And right now, in UK society, people aren't talking about aging. They're not talking about ageism. You know, we did research, 40% of the people that we spoke to have never considered ageism before, even though it's a protected characteristic. They've never really thought about it before. And more worryingly, I think 1 in 10 people that we spoke to were in complete denial that ageism was even a thing, that it just didn't exist. So we sometimes have to kind of navigate a real knife edge around wanting to bring to the surface an injustice that's happening, with managing the fact that some people are going to accuse us of being woke. Now, on the subject of woke and all of that stuff, I worried about it a lot when we launched this campaign. And then I saw something on LinkedIn from somebody I respect very much, who talked about the challenge of wokeism and being accused of it. And he said something like, if being woke is about addressing social justice, bringing to the surface things that nobody wants to talk about, giving people a voice who haven't had a voice up to now, then I'm proudly woke. And I think that's where I'm at with that. If what we're doing is creating that level of debate, then so be it. Then I'm here and I'm proud, and I'm definitely up for being a bit woke. And the other big challenge is that there are often a huge array of kind of budgets that are involved in campaigns of this ilk. You can run campaigns on a shoestring, you absolutely can, but you have to learn to understand and cut your cloth accordingly, and to an extent manage other people's expectations about what will change in the world. Remember, every change is kind of iterative, it's small, tiny steps. So if we've got a small budget, we have to accept the fact that we're going to make that incremental small step, but it is better than not doing it at all. And also we need to make sure that we're working in partnership as much as we possibly can, because we can amplify what we're doing, our little specific piece of the pie. We can help and contribute to the wider change we want to see in the world. It doesn't all have to be through the work that we are particularly doing.
Thank you so much for that. You know, you touched on a couple of different pieces. I know, like, because campaigns can go, you know, any which way, you know, regardless of how much work you put into it, the budget, you know, it's just, again, people's perceptions of, you know, how they receive certain things. And, you know, I'm happy to hear that, like, certain ways you've navigated things, you know, it's concrete steps that you can take to actually, like, figure out, okay, maybe for the next campaign, maybe this is what we could do, or for a certain something else, we can also manage something else. I just wanted to go back to something you touched on, which was the evaluation piece. I was wondering if you could kind of, if you can, just kind of talk through certain things that you might do in achieving, you know, kind of metrics, or even if it's not metrics specifically, just insights into like how a campaign might perform.
Absolutely. So I mean, and this is, and I'm also a bit passionate and a bit boring about this, but I'm not a researcher, but I know the value of it. And so for us, we've always, for any campaigns that I've worked on, we've always had a very comprehensive evaluation strategy. So it's usually at a number of levels. So the first is if we've got our kind of overarching outcome. So for us, in the ageism campaign, it's increasing public awareness, understanding of ageism. It's that public attitudes and behaviours towards aging will improve. It's also that public attitudes and behaviours toward older people will improve, and that older people will report a kind of reduction in their experiences, albeit initially they might report an increase because they are recognizing it more, or we are recognizing it more, but they would eventually, we would be able to see a reduction in the experience of ageism, ageist attitudes and behavior. So that's what I call the kind of big picture outcomes that we want to see. And to do that, we've taken the view that we will do a baseline, we'll run the campaign for 3 years, and then we'll do a follow-up. And what you're looking for there is trends that change. So we might put a percentage increase on all of those. To a greater or lesser extent, that's useful. Seeing when you're starting it in the way that we are from absolute scratch, any change is welcome. So that's that kind of overall. And we work with a company called NatSen, and they're working in collaboration with the University of Kent, again, who've got some real academic people who are really looking at ageism from an academic perspective, working on board with them. The second level really is just like, are your interventions actually working? And so that's much more about the kind of metrics that you might get around people interacting with your campaign, have people taking the action that you want them to take from the campaign, and are you kind of seeing more people having conversations? So for us, for example, in this kind of first year, what we're really looking at doing is we want people to really stop and reflect, to think about whether or not actually they might either have experienced ageism or might be inadvertently and unwittingly perpetuating ageism in society, in what they do and what they say, and then taking that moment and thinking, maybe I could do something different. And stopping doing something is as powerful as kind of taking a kind of change. So that's kind of what we want to see from that perspective. And then the third element is really kind of micro level. And that's where we're looking at specific performances, as I touched on then, specific performances of particular channels that we've used to reach people, whether that be billboard posters, whether that be stuff on social media, whether that be TV adverts, whether it's an animation or a kind of or a static a statistic, for example. So really looking to see at that level, real micro level, what changes happened, and that's the bit that helps us to develop the future campaigning.
Incredible. Thank you for that. Like, it's also very helpful to kind of see both the macro, the micro, and then kind of everything in between, because I think all aspects of evaluating something like a campaign and its success is, it's incredibly important, and it's good to like kind of weigh out all the aspects of it. So thank you for that. I also just wanted to go back to another kind of term I think you used a little bit earlier. You said aging is a protected characteristic.
Mm.
I was just wondering if you could just expand on that just a little briefly.
Well, I mean, we know, so, encased in law, we have a number of protected characteristics, whether that be about gender, whether that be about race, and there are 9 in total, and age is one of them. But I bet you if we did in the UK a kind of a poll of 1,000 people, I imagine that a large majority of those would be able to list a number of other protected characteristics, because they get talked about all the time, but they probably wouldn't mention age and ageism as being one of those protected characteristics. So it's not known, and if it's not known, people aren't implementing all the legal requirements that they have to necessarily in order to ensure that you're not discriminated against because of your age.
Amazing. So that, again, that's another barrier towards all this work that we're doing. So, if we can somehow, move that in towards that, then I think that'd be a great achievement on its own, and kind of help us move forward with all this kind of work. Amazing. Thanks, Joe. So just kind of on turning a little bit differently, with the conversation, again, you mentioned before, ageism is something that can be often internalized and it's inherent in society across several aspects of life. So if there are individuals or groups looking to advocate for fighting against ageism with these kinds of campaigns, such as within the workplace or with disability or any other aspect in life, what would be your advice for them?
First of all, do it. I know that sounds really, a bit blasé, but really, I do believe that we can make great changes by thinking through and applying behavior change principles, if you like, to how we go about asking people to be aware of something and to change their attitude and behavior towards it. So a lot of it would follow what we talked about a bit earlier, making sure that you've got really good insights research. So if you have a budget and you are thinking about how am I going to allocate it, really doing good in-depth insight is key, because that's the thing that will save you money later on, because you're not going to be wasting it on trying to do something that may not work. The insights also allows us to take away our own kind of like inherent biases about what we think the problem might be, because actually you've got the insights that's telling you that a broad group of people are experiencing this issue in this particular way. The second is to develop your concept, develop your creative, and test it. How is this landing, and is it landing in the way that you want it to? And are there any unforeseen circumstances? Some of them are quite good. Others are not so good, and you really want to be avoiding that. And so really kind of develop and testing that. And then deliver and test. There's a bit of a theme going on here, I know, but kind of deliver and test. So what worked and what didn't, and helping that to feed into how you then take it forward. The big thing for me is, particularly depending, it doesn't really matter what size you are, but working in partnership with others in the field is also really key for me. And when I worked on the Time to Change campaign, for example, we were really, really well funded. So we had the ability to do lots of really in-depth research and development and then share that widely. So we thought about it sometimes as almost being that kind of snowplow that kind of went forward and then allowed others to come in behind, either to jump off some of the stuff that we were doing at that national level, or indeed learning from our insights, and being able to personalize that and tailor that to the target audiences, or to the audiences that those groups were representing. So working in partnership and sharing knowledge is such a passion for me. I think that's absolutely key. I think I talked a little bit about budgets and being conscious of cutting your cloth, managing expectations internally and externally about what you can achieve. And particularly if your budgets are tight, this becomes even more important, is to be super, super focused on what it is that you're trying to achieve. What is the change that you want to see in the world, and making sure that everything you do feeds into achieving that, and that you're evaluating to make sure that you know that what you're doing is achieving all of those things. And then I think just a real final thing is absolutely learn from others. Speak with loads of people who've been doing this stuff before. Also, what can you beg, steal, and borrow from others so that you're not reinventing the wheel? Because that's the other bugbear of mine in terms of some of this stuff. And one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about being able to use some of my experience to kind of feed out to others is that you don't want to be hiding all of that great work under a bushel. You absolutely want to be getting that out as far and wide as possible.
Yeah, incredible. I 100% agree with you. The more that we can share with each other, the more we can actually work towards achieving the goals that we want to, have, the impact that we want to see in the world. And I also really like the point that you made earlier about, really taking a look at your insights research to kind of remove that inherent bias that we come with. And, we don't even notice it. You're like, yeah, I think this might be the actual issue. But then you look and you're like, oh, nope, there's this XYZ happening over here on the side. So I think it really kind of, breaks us down. We're like, okay, it's good to take a look at this and, evaluate it in a different aspect. Amazing. And so behavioral change campaigns and other advocacy actions for improving perceptions on aging and older people are normally informed by evidence and research, such as the impact of ageism on individuals and society. And so, in in informing these kinds of campaigns from your perspective, where do you see current research kind of lacking, or where are there areas that we can kind of improve our insights on right now with aging, or is there kind of just all over the place with that?
Such an interesting one, because when I came in to work with the Centre for Aging Better on the Age Without Limits campaign, the thing that they had done up to that point was done some beautiful research, and actually one of the things that I will need to send through to you, because I've forgotten to send that already, is we've got this really great piece of research called The Harms of Ageism. So that's really sort of pivotal piece for me. But I think what we found was that actually, if you look at mental health, let's take that as an example, people are evaluating that all the time. They're doing lots and lots of research into all aspects of mental health. There are many aspects of it that people aren't. For example, more severe and enduring mental health problems like psychosis and schizophrenia. We know there's a gap in the market there. But aging and ageism, there's not as much research just generally. And of course, from my perspective, that is fed in by ageism and the fact that we dismiss it as being harmless and not that important. World Health Organization are doing some amazing work, and as I mentioned, there's University of Kent who are also doing some amazing academic work. There will be others, but it's noticeable how much less research I feel like just generally there is. So I would really welcome more of that. World Health Organization are pulling together a kind of standardized set of measures so that we can measure ageism, and therefore we'd be able to really accurately measure improvements in that. That's massively welcome, and really great that we're doing that. So I think that was the challenge that we found, was that there's just not as much, and it definitely speaks to, as I say, the kind of ageism that exists, that it's not prioritized as an issue to look into.
Yeah, absolutely. Having, I think, like as you mentioned, having all those indicators available, pointed towards ageism and what we can actually look at, it'll be incredibly helpful. Sometimes you, again, kind of going back to the point earlier you made, you don't even know those indicators might be connected or exist. So I think it's really, really helpful, especially in getting more of that research out and ready for us. Perfect. And so I have another question here, which is, language is an important part of our everyday lives, and it certainly plays a part in how we understand and perceive ideas on aging. So from your perspective, what are some of the things as a society we should be more aware of to avoid being ageist? For example, when we're writing things or we're just speaking with one another.
Well, I really like the fact that you said that we're more aware of, because one of the things that we have to, again, this kind of like fine dividing line is kind of, we don't want to be coming across as being the kind of thought police. We absolutely don't want that. But there are some things that I think if we really stopped and thought about a little bit more, we might recognize the fact that whilst they're kind of internally, they're kind of banter, and in context they are banter, but actually we really need to think about where the perceptions of some words might come from, to help us to avoid being pejorative or patronizing in the way that we talk about things. So obviously context is everything, but personally I prefer to be known by my name than that sweet old lady or dearie, for example. From some quarters of my life, that might not be a problem, but and of course, when you just starkly say that out of context, you can see a lot of people will be like, really, just talk to the hand. I'm not really interested in that. But fundamentally, some of the words that we use feed into and are loaded with with negative connotations. So one of the things that we found through our research was that people fear getting older, and they fear getting older when they're in their 20s and 30s. There was something I saw recently about some young people who were 12, 13, who were for Christmas asking for age-defying cosmetic products, really expensive, age-defying cosmetics. So from that young age, we're suddenly starting to think that being older is somehow negative. So our language and what we do and how we think about that feeds into that everyday ageism that we see. So it's really, really important. Similarly, any kind of language or the ways in which we refer to people that feed into kind of really negative stereotypical assumptions of somebody just because of the chronological number that might happen to be associated with them at any one point in time is not helpful. Half the time we see lots of things written where age is included, and we think, oh, at some point they're going to come to the bit in the story that's about age. Oh, no, they're not, because actually it's irrelevant. But somehow we have to say, person, Bob from down the road, 76, did X, Y, or Z. The 76 bit being completely irrelevant. Other things are things that we are inadvertent, and coming back to this point about the fact that we sometimes say and do things unwittingly. And sometimes we say and do things for the absolute best of intentions. So I don't know about anybody else, but there's been lots of times where people might say, or where I've witnessed and heard people say, oh, you look really good for your age. And I think to myself, oh, great, I look really good. Oh, thanks. That's a brilliant compliment. Why on earth does it rely on whether or what my age is? And so, but of course, when you say that, you really are saying, you're trying to be complimentary. But if you unpick that, what does it say? Well, it says that actually, if I'm older chronologically, I can't possibly be looking good. And therefore I buck the trend. And the only reason I think that I'm bucking the trend by saying that is because I'm making an assumption that when I get old, it's all going to be about frailty and decline. And that's going to be inevitable. When we know that what we really want to see is this breadth of experience, the diversity of aging that simply isn't there. So we're doing a program, we're doing a peak of activity on the 20th of March, which is all about representation. It's all about seeing and being seen. And we're encouraging people to download our free image library, which you can get from the Age Without Limits website. But we really want to get away from this. We must all drink from the fountain of youth, because if we don't, we're not worthy. We have less to offer. Because it must all be about that relevance of kind of youth. So we really want to make sure that we've got that breadth and that diversity of age, and that we're making people who are older visible, because we also are disappearing. We disappear from TV adverts, we disappear from all sorts of things that, and there's no reason for us to do that. There's no reason for us to be disappearing as we get older.
Absolutely. So many gems in that last bit that you were talking about. I absolutely love, there's diversity in aging. We require that representation. And so those are just important things to just keep in mind, because it's not just a one kind of singular, set of adjectives that we should expect in terms of, older people and aging, and really take the time to explore that, make considerations, and, we're always coming across different people, walks of life. So it's always important to just kind of take it in and, understand your own thoughts and beliefs about certain things. So I really appreciate you going through that with me. Amazing. So now I would like to take the opportunity to invite participants to pose questions either in the chat box. You can also raise your hand and we can kind of take questions in that way as well. Just to start us off, I'm just going to pose a question from the chat box from Shmuel. He is a weekly participant in our Global Cafe. So I'm just going to pose this towards you, Joe. So his question is, what, according to you, for example, what is the role of community and education in terms of breaking boundaries, breaking limits of aging? And then he also has a secondary question here, is what is the role of community and education and kind of the entire integration of older adults within the population, within our society?
Okay, so for me, there is a fundamental in terms of if we think about changing behavior, we've got to know something about the issue that we want people to see, and that this is the education bit of it. We need to be able to inform people about the fact that ageism exists, the fact that it causes harms, the fact that ageism isn't inevitable, and that we all have a part to play in making sure that we don't perpetuate ageism. So in terms of that kind of education piece, I suppose it's twofold. One is we want to make sure that we are informing the population about those things, getting people up to the sort of same level so that we can start breaking some of those boundaries. The second is, in terms of education and community, it's never too young to start talking about ageism. And the reason that it's never too young to start talking about ageism is because we know that there was a piece of research recently that said we start to develop, or young people as young as 3 years old are starting to already have internalized that image of, that stereotypical image of what an older person is and looks like. And they are, in terms of drawings, in terms of how they approach it, they are already internalizing some of those negative stereotypes. So it's really important that that we're able to kind of call that out to an extent with, their children, but, to be able to kind of gently question that. So a colleague of mine, for example, her 5-year-old was watching a kind of TV program, and it was all about kind of dottery old granny, and it was great. It was really amusing. That even she was saying there were some bits in it that I found really funny. And then she was like, "Is your grandma like that?" And her child said, "No, my grandma's normal." Now that is so powerful in terms of what it is that we need to be able to be talking about all the way through life. We need to be able to be just gently calling out, why is that different? So that's that. In terms of the integration bit, what we do know is when we have young people and older people integrating, we get to recognize who we each are as individuals, not as this stereotypical fodder, if you like, that we're fed through media, etc. So as with all things, we would call it kind of social contact, being around people, being around. So if you are potentially at risk of being ageist, being around people of multiple ages will help to alleviate that. So there's a lot we can do in terms of communities and education to make sure we're finding lots of opportunities to bring people together, because it's the best myth buster around stereotypes that anybody could ever have.
Truly, immersing yourself around everyone, you really get that taste. You're like, okay, no, this is actually what is real. And especially that point that you brought up about, what is normal? There is no, necessarily one specific thing that is considered normal. So it's good to, explore beyond that and actually take in and see what is actually happening around us. Amazing. So we have a question here from Ken Howe. I was wondering if you wanted to pose that question to Joe.
Yes, I know that we in Canada did some research on homelessness. And when I saw the results, it was scary that seniors were not on that list hardly. And yet I knew, and from the research that we had done, that there were a lot of homeless people. But they were shy or embarrassed or did not want to admit that they could not afford to live independently.
Mm-hmm.
They had to sleep on their kids' couches or in their basement, but I think the family structure is also broken. The seniors aren't revered as in certain cultures. In the North American culture, I watched a bunch of great movies, but one was a fellow pretended to have died. He sent an invite to his family to come to the funeral or the wake at his house. He set up a whole meal. The kids showed up. My goodness, he's, what's happening here? And, he said, it's the only way I can get you to come and visit is because you wouldn't come otherwise, but because I faked my death, you came just out of respect. Great English movie called, I think it's Mrs. Brown's Cabbage Wars. You must have seen that one. And it's, it's the same thing. We shove people into nursing homes or into retirement communities. And I think the life expectancy is probably 6 months in one of those places. Your research would probably show that. Or if they live on the street, they don't live very long. So the senior statistics are skewed as a result of so many different factors that we don't get an honest number of how many people senior, but the options aren't very many to go from living in your own home. You can't manage there. What's your next best option? There aren't many. I think that's why I'm passionate about building co-housing, building affordable housing, which we have a volunteer team that's doing. I've preached this message before, Pinecrest Housing. So we bought a school and we're converting it into affordable housing for seniors. But, do your statistics, are they able to find those seniors to get that kind of information of who's homeless and not?
No, that's not what we've concentrated on up to this point. So again, in terms of the ageism campaign, it's very much about that kind of individual attitudes and behaviours. Centre for Aging Better, I don't believe have done anything on homelessness, but I think what you're talking about just speaks to that invisibility of people as we get older, and the fact that we're not prioritising all of the things that we need. And that starts with ageism, right? So if we can crack the ageism nut, what we end up doing is if we're going to our policymakers and saying, actually, do you know what? We need you to be concentrating on this and this and this, because that would make life easier for people living in communities to stay in communities. So let's take an example. If we decided that actually, in order to get out and feel safe walking around, we needed to have really good pathways. I know that sounds really innocuous, but it's one of the things that keep people isolated in their own homes because they don't feel safe walking. So let's say we did that. It isn't actually just older people who benefit from that. If you're a parent and you've got a pram and you're trying to walk along a path that is unstable, that's also a problem. So I think what we've got to try to understand is that we need to make changes for people in communities across the board that actually benefit everybody. And frankly, the other thing that I think is really important, and this comes back to answering all of those questions that have come so far, is that ageism affects all of us, every single one of us, because we are all aging every single day. And when you then intersect other things with kind of ageism, like gender, like homelessness, like all of those things, you then sort of amplify the negative impact on an individual of all of those of ageism alongside all of those other things. So I think that we have a homes section in Centre for Aging Better, and again willing to kind of like send you the kind of links to that, and that is all about how do we kind of make sure that we have homes that are fit for purpose for people as they age. And again, I'm not an expert on that because I'm working as a kind of one step out of the Centre for Aging Better. We can certainly send you some links to the work that they are doing in that area.
I know that housing is a problem worldwide, and the people who are willing to address that are into it to make a great deal of money. In my small community, it costs between $4,000 and $6,000 a month. Divide that by 2 for England. I'm English too, born and raised in Derby, but they've taken advantage of it. They said, "Oh, look, there's a bunch of these seniors. They're going to sell their homes. They're going to move into seniors housing." But I have friends who have parents in these types of facilities, and they said, "Problem is, if they live very long, we're all going to have to, as a family, pitch in to keep them in there because it costs so much money." That it, I have a good pension, but I couldn't afford $5,000-6,000 a month to live in a seniors retirement community. That there aren't many other options. You put them into an apartment building, you've got no family, no connection, no friends. Loneliness is the biggest cause of death worldwide. It's not a problem just for my community, it's worldwide. And yet, how do we, I think that's why this is a good forum to be able to address those issues of homelessness, poor diets, or not eating right, or loneliness, or whatever, and how do you address that problem? And I think that in Canada, one of our click words is housing first. House them first, whether they be seniors or drug problems or homelessness. Solve the housing problem first, then you can address those other issues, be it loneliness for seniors or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. It's always good to take a broader look at all these issues relating back to ageism, for sure. So we are coming close to the end of our day today, but if you wanted to we have one last question posed here at the end by Ellie. If you just wanted to touch on this briefly, or if you've seen it in one of your campaigns recently of how racism might intersect with ageism.
Well, we know all of the kind of and I think actually I'll go broader than that. I think it's any of those protected characteristics that we talked about. All of the things that we experience when we experience racism are amplified when you intersect ageism with that, because you effectively get, if you think about that as a kind of Venn diagram, you have all of those things, and then they're impacted on one. So we know that those intersectionality bits, and they're things that we're thinking about doing in the future once we get this kind of first set of the campaign done. How do we then think about those who are already negatively impacted by other things? How do we work with, in partnership with others who have that as a very specific piece of work, advocacy work? How do we work with them to kind of help to overlay the ageism issue alongside that? So it's something that we're thinking about doing. It's going to be 3-4 years down the line probably, but we would encourage people who are working with others with protected characteristics to think about how they might utilize some of our resources on the website to adapt them and make them their own, in order to be thinking about how they might address some of those things.
Absolutely. Going back to the point of, really utilizing that shared knowledge together, help each other build that capacity from our different realms, incredibly important. And, also including lived experience as part of that is really, really important. Yeah, we have a comment here from Brendan. Design for the young and you exclude the old. Design for the old and you include everyone. There you go. That's an amazing comment
That's
right
lovely,
there.
actually. I might write that down.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that comment, Brendan. Perfect. So now that we are slowly coming close to the end of today's Global Cafe, and before we wrap up, I would love to hear your key takeaways, Joe, from today's discussion. I will give you a little time to gather some of your thoughts as I will introduce our next week's topic and speaker right now. So please join our discussion next week with Miss Beck Bennett on the topic of changing mindsets. Let's make ear and hearing care a reality for all. So please join us. Listen to that great discussion next week, moderated by my colleague, Miss Roxana Badiai. All right. So now we're back to you, Joe. So just in a few sentences, what are some of your key takeaways from our conversation today? And what would you like to just kind of leave with this conversation today?
I think what I really want to kind of leave with people is that ageism is that prejudice that's hidden in plain sight. That it's really embedded in society and is even accepted as normal by those of us who are older. And we often dismiss it as harmless, but research tells us it's categorical that that ageist beliefs and ideas are incredibly damaging to individuals and therefore to society. So we really, and I would really want to encourage us to think about in our sphere of influence, whether that's be individually, whether that be in workplaces, whether that be in homes, that we really think about what is it that we can do. That's small steps, remember. What is it that we can do in those spheres of influence that will really make a difference to how society is thinking about older people and attitudes to our own aging, as well as others.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Before we sign off, I would like to thank everyone for another great week of our Global Cafe sessions, with special thanks to Joe Loughran for joining us today. And also to great thanks to the incredible people working here at the IFA who have supported this and every Global Cafe, in particular, Berenice Anaya and Roxana Badiai. So thank you so much. We hope to see you all next Friday and wish everyone a great weekend. So take care.